The problem of evil has long challenged theologians and philosophers, posing one of the most profound questions of human existence. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and wholly good, why does evil exist? This question has inspired extensive debate, giving rise to theological, philosophical, and existential reflections. To engage this issue meaningfully, one must explore its logical, evidential, and existential dimensions, each offering unique insights into the tension between divine goodness and the presence of suffering. The logical problem of evil argues that the existence of an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God is incompatible with the presence of evil. This problem, famously articulated by the ancient philosopher Epicurus, is summarized as follows. If God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he is not omnipotent. If God is able but not willing, then he is not omnibenevolent. If God is both able and willing, then why does evil exist? Modern philosophers like J.L. Mackie have expanded upon this argument, asserting that the coexistence of God and evil entails a logical contradiction. This perspective assumes that an all-good God would have the desire to eliminate all evil, and that an all-powerful God would possess the capability to do so. In response, Christian theologians such as Alvin Plantinga have offered the free will defense. Plantinga contends that a world containing free creatures is more valuable than one populated by automatons. To enable genuine freedom, including the ability to choose love, moral goodness, or creativity, God must permit the possibility of moral evil. Without the potential for wrongdoing, freedom would be illusory. Thus, evil arises not from God's will, but as a byproduct of human free will. Additionally, some philosophers argue that certain evils may be necessary for achieving greater goods. For instance, the existence of challenges and adversity can foster virtues such as courage, resilience, and empathy. The logical problem assumes that God could create a world with all the benefits of these virtues, but without any accompanying evils. Yet this assumption remains debatable. The evidential problem of evil examines how the sheer scale, intensity, and apparent gratuitousness of suffering challenge the plausibility of an omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good God. Unlike the logical problem of evil, it does not claim a logical contradiction between God and evil, but instead argues that the amount and nature of suffering make God's existence improbable. Philosopher William Rowe has been central to articulating this problem. He provided the example of a fawn trapped and dying painfully in a forest fire. This suffering, seemingly devoid of any moral or spiritual purpose, raises the question, why would a benevolent deity allow such an event? Rowe's argument suggests that instances of apparently unnecessary suffering count as evidence against the existence of an all-good and all-powerful God. Supporters of the evidential problem also point to systemic forms of suffering, such as genocides, natural disasters, and chronic diseases, as further evidence. They argue that the magnitude of such suffering appears incompatible with a deity who could intervene to prevent it without compromising other divine goals or values. In response, theologians and philosophers offer several theodicies and defenses. One prominent response is the soul-making theodicy, rooted in the works of Irenaeus and later developed by John Hick. This view proposes that suffering provides the conditions necessary for humans to grow morally and spiritually, cultivating virtues such as courage, empathy, and perseverance. While these virtues might not justify every instance of suffering, proponents argue that they collectively contribute to a greater divine purpose. Another response is the skeptical theism defense, which challenges the assumption that humans can comprehend God's reasons for permitting suffering. This perspective holds that God's omniscience far exceeds human understanding, making it possible that what appears as gratuitous suffering serves purposes beyond human comprehension. Critics, however, argue that this approach risks undermining the very notion of a benevolent God by making his actions inscrutable. Additionally, the greater good's defense suggests that some evils are permitted because they lead to goods that could not otherwise exist. For instance, the existence of free will may entail the risk of moral evil, and certain virtues may arise only in response to specific challenges. However, critics of this view question whether the goods achieved always outweigh the suffering endured. Ultimately, the evidential problem of evil invites ongoing exploration, challenging believers to grapple with profound questions about the nature of God, the purpose of suffering, and the limits of human understanding. While no resolution fully satisfies all perspectives, this dialogue deepens our engagement with one of life's most enduring mysteries. Unlike the logical problem, the evidential problem of evil does not argue that God and evil are logically incompatible, but that the sheer magnitude and gratuitousness of suffering make God's existence improbable. Philosopher William Rowe highlighted examples of seemingly unnecessary suffering, such as a fawn dying in a forest fire, to argue that such events are unlikely in a world governed by a benevolent deity. In response, theologians like Richard Swinburne suggest that suffering serves purposes beyond human understanding, such as soul-making or the development of virtues like courage, empathy, and perseverance. This view, known as the soul-making theodicy, traces its origins to the early Christian theologian Irenaeus, who argued that humanity's journey towards spiritual maturity requires exposure to challenges and suffering. The Bible offers diverse insights into the existence of evil and suffering, often emphasizing their redemptive potential and the mystery of divine wisdom. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Job provides one of the most profound meditations on suffering. Job endures immense personal and physical trials, losing his family, wealth, and health. Throughout his lamentations, Job questions why the righteous suffer. God's response, delivered from a whirlwind, does not offer a direct explanation, but highlights the vastness of divine knowledge and the limits of human understanding. This narrative underscores themes of trust in God's wisdom and the inscrutability of his purposes. The Psalms also grapple with suffering, with many expressing raw emotions of despair and hope. Psalm 22, for instance, begins with the anguished cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" but transitions into a reaffirmation of trust in God's deliverance. Such texts reveal a theology that does not shy away from the reality of pain, but encourages faith amid trials. The prophetic literature often connects suffering to the collective sins of the people, portraying it as a form of divine discipline meant to restore covenantal faithfulness. For example, in the book of Isaiah, the concept of the suffering servant, Isaiah 53, presents a figure who bears the iniquities of others, suggesting a redemptive role for suffering within God's salvific plan. Similarly, Lamentations mourns the destruction of Jerusalem while expressing hope in God's steadfast love and faithfulness, emphasizing that suffering can lead to renewal and repentance. Wisdom literature, such as Ecclesiastes, approaches suffering from a philosophical angle, reflecting on the futility of life's hardships and the importance of fearing God despite life's enigmas. These texts collectively present a multifaceted view of suffering, portraying it as a means of spiritual growth, divine testing, communal discipline, and ultimately, a mystery that calls for humility and faith in God's overarching plan. The existential problem of evil delves into the profound emotional and psychological turmoil caused by suffering, focusing on how individuals grapple with the lived experience of evil. Unlike the logical or evidential dimensions, which address intellectual debates about God's existence and the nature of evil, the existential problem centers on the personal and existential crises provoked by suffering. This dimension of the problem of evil emerges most vividly in moments of intense personal loss, injustice, or trauma. For instance, a parent grieving the death of a child, a survivor of war facing its aftermath, or an individual navigating chronic illness might find themselves questioning the purpose of their suffering. These experiences provoke questions not only about God's goodness, but also about one's own identity, the meaning of life, and the possibility of hope in the face of despair. Philosophers such as Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche have addressed existential concerns about suffering and its implications for human existence. Kierkegaard, for instance, viewed suffering as integral to the human condition and argued that it can serve as a catalyst for spiritual growth. Through suffering, individuals confront the depths of their vulnerability and dependency, potentially leading them to deeper faith and self-awareness. Nietzsche, on the other hand, rejected the traditional theistic framework, advocating instead for a re-evaluation of values and the embrace of life's hardships as opportunities for personal empowerment and the assertion of the will to power. Religious responses to the existential problem of evil often emphasize the transformative potential of suffering. The concept of redemptive suffering appears in many faith traditions, suggesting that enduring pain can lead to personal growth, spiritual refinement, or a closer connection with the divine. In Judaism, for example, the story of Job illustrates a journey through anguish and questioning, culminating in a deeper understanding of human limits and the inscrutability of God. Similarly, in other traditions, rituals, prayers, and community support provide frameworks for individuals to process their suffering and find meaning in it. Existentialism also highlights the potential for individuals to find meaning in suffering through their own choices and interpretations. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, proposed in his seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, that even in the most harrowing circumstances, humans retain the freedom to choose their response to suffering. Frankl's philosophy, rooted in his experiences in concentration camps, emphasizes that meaning can be derived from suffering when one sees it as an opportunity to uphold values, demonstrate resilience, or contribute to a greater cause. Thus, the existential problem of evil invites profound introspection, urging individuals to confront suffering not only as a theological question, but also as a deeply personal journey. Beyond logical and evidential considerations, the existential problem of evil addresses the deeply personal anguish that suffering causes. For many, the question of why evil exists is not merely intellectual but profoundly emotional, rooted in experiences of loss, injustice, and pain. The problem of evil remains one of the most challenging and enduring questions in philosophy and theology. While logical and evidential arguments raise significant objections, they also invite profound reflections on the nature of freedom, the purpose of suffering, and the character of God. Biblical narratives and theological interpretations provide meaningful frameworks for addressing these questions, emphasizing themes of hope, redemption, and divine mystery. Ultimately, the reconciliation of a good God with the presence of suffering may lie not in resolving the tension, but in embracing the paradox, trusting that divine purposes transcend human understanding.